My name is Amara Kendall, and I learned my grandmother was dead through a Facebook post. A cousin I barely remembered had uploaded a photo of her garden with the caption, "Rest easy." Ruth. No one called. Not my mother. Not my sister. I sat on my couch in Denver with the screen lighting my hands, wondering how silence could travel so far and still sting like that. 3 weeks passed before the phone finally rang. A number from North Carolina I didn't recognize. The man on the line introduced himself as Andrew Sloan, my grandmother's estate attorney. His voice was formal but carried a hint of something heavier. "Miss Kendall," he said, "your grandmother left specific instructions for me to contact you privately." She emphasized the word privately. I asked what this was about, but he paused before answering. "It concerns a property in Wilmington, and a message only you are meant to read." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. That maybe he'd meant my mother, Caroline. "No," he replied, as if hearing the thought. "Mrs. Reed isn't aware of this arrangement, and she must not be." Dodd. The next morning I drove east until the flatlands turned to salt air. Andrew's office sat above a small bank, all dark wood and dusted blinds. He greeted me with the kind of handshake that feels like the start of something irreversible. "Your grandmother was deliberate," he said, sliding a cream envelope across the desk. "She requested I give you this before we speak of anything else." My name was written on the front in her unsteady cursive, and beneath it, a faint imprint of the seal she used on every Christmas card I'd never received. I opened it carefully, afraid the paper might crumble if I breathed too hard. Inside was a single page. "My dearest Amara, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. You were the only one who visited me for me. Not for what I owned. The house by the sea is yours. Do with it what you will. But promise me you'll stop letting them pretend you don't exist." My hands shook as I folded the note, feeling the weight of a promise I hadn't known I'd been waiting to keep. I looked up, and Andrew was watching quietly. "There's one more thing," he said. "She asked that you tell no one, not even your mother." I nodded, hearing my own voice steady itself as I said, "I understand." Then, without meaning to, I glanced at the calendar on his wall and circled Christmas in my mind. For the next 11 months, I lived two lives that never touched each other. By day, I was still Amara Kendall, the quiet financial consultant who filed quarterly reports and answered client emails. By night, I became the unseen heir of a Wilmington beach house worth more than anything my family had ever owned. I sent documents to Andrew Sloan, signed transfers, paid property taxes, and wired insurance fees that totaled nearly $5,000. Every receipt in my name and no one else's. Andrew's voice over the phone was always calm, methodical. "Once the deed clears, you'll be the sole owner," he said. "Would you like me to notify your mother?" I told him no. "Not yet." He hesitated only a second before replying. "Then we'll proceed quietly." His phrasing made it sound like an operation. And maybe it was. Each form I signed felt less like paperwork and more like a slow reclamation of something I hadn't realized was mine to begin with. In March, the county clerk emailed me confirmation of the transfer. My name was printed cleanly on the title Amara Ruth Kendall, proof that Ruth had remembered me after everyone else forgot. I kept the certificate in my desk drawer at work, beneath a spreadsheet labeled Client Forecasting. A private victory disguised as routine paperwork. Months passed, and the world outside my office windows kept spinning. Easter brunch photos, wedding anniversaries, Elise's career milestones. None of them included me. The silence stretched so long it almost became comfortable. The kind that hums like background noise until you forget you're listening. Then, in July, A notification blinked on my phone. Elise had tagged a location, Wilmington Beach House. Her caption read, "Family traditions never die." The picture showed her laughing on the porch I now legally owned. I saved it. Then emailed Andrew the screenshot. "Consider this early evidence of trespassing," I wrote. His reply came within minutes. "Excellent documentation. Ms. Kendall. Let them keep posting." By September, another photo appeared, my mother supervising renovations. She'd hired a contractor to repaint the deck and replace roof shingles. I asked Andrew what to do, and he chuckled softly. "Let her pay for the improvements. It raises the property's value at her expense." Cupper. When the last invoice came through in October, I filed it beside my tax statements. The total read $12,000. Every cent from Caroline's account. I didn't feel guilt. I felt precision. By November, everything was complete: the deed, the insurance, the taxes. Wilmington was legally, quietly, tenine. I looked at my calendar, circled December 24th, and whispered to no one, "It's time." I arrived in Wilmington the morning of Christmas Eve. The air sharp enough to taste salt before I even saw the water. The house stood exactly as I remembered it from childhood photos: white porch, weathered railings, the faint hum of the ocean just beyond the dunes. I unlocked the door with the new key I'd received from Andrew and stepped into silence thick enough to feel earned. My grandmother's handwriting still sat framed on the mantel. "Stop letting them pretend you don't exist." H9. By 8. I had unpacked the folder of documents: deed, will, receipts, insurance, everything proofed, stamped, and notarized. I called the Dare County Sheriff's Office and asked for Deputy Calvin Morse, the officer Andrew had recommended. His voice was steady, almost kind. "You're certain you want an officer on site?" "Ma'am?" he asked. "Family matters like these can get messy." I told him I didn't expect chaos. Only confirmation. I'd rather be prepared than apologetic. He said he'd meet me by mid-morning to verify ownership. When he arrived, he studied each paper carefully before setting them back in order. "Everything checks out," he said. "You're the rightful owner." No question. He hesitated, as if measuring the weight of what he was about to ask. "You expecting them soon?" I told him my mother and her caravan would arrive before noon. "Same as every year." He folded his arms and gave me a look that wasn't pity, just recognition. "You sure you want to be here when they find out?" I said I'd waited long enough to stop running from my own family's house. He nodded once and closed his notebook. "Then I'll stay nearby, just in case anyone tries to make this harder than it has to be." I thanked him, and he gave a small half-smile. Hard rarely means impossible. When he left, I walked through the rooms one last time. The kitchen smelled faintly of paint from the renovations my mother had paid for. The new appliances gleamed like apologies no one had spoken. I straightened the deed on the counter and whispered, "You did this, Grandma." Outside, the wind shifted off the water, cold and sure. The house no longer felt borrowed. It felt awake. By late morning, 6 SUVs turned down the gravel drive, each one packed with luggage and certainty. I stood just inside the doorway as the first door slammed and my mother's voice carried over the wind. "Thomas." "The lock's stuck again," she said, rattling her key against the handle. When it didn't turn, she frowned, irritation edging her tone. "Honestly, who changes locks without telling me?" I opened the door before she could try again and said evenly, "Someone who owns them." "One?" Caroline blinked like her eyes couldn't adjust fast enough. "Amara? What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her I was home, and the words seemed to knock the breath from her. Elise appeared behind her, dragging a suitcase across the steps. You changed the locks on Mom's house? She said. I shook my head once. I changed the locks on my house. Their silence stretched until even the air felt crowded. My mother forced a brittle laugh. Don't start this nonsense. This is my mother's property. I said. Not anymore. It's mine. Has been for 11 months. Quote. Thomas stepped forward. His voice quiet but firm. That's impossible. Amara. Your grandmother's estate was handled years ago. I told him the estate had been reopened privately, that a new will superseded the old one. You're mistaken. Caroline snapped, her face tightening. Ruth wasn't well. She was confused. I pulled a folder from behind the door and handed it to her. Her doctor certified her cognitive health 6 months before she passed. You can check page 2. Her fingers trembled as she read the seal. You forged this, she said. And I replied, then arrest me. The sheriff's already here. Gating Ibaz. Deputy Calvin approached from the path, his voice calm as he confirmed the paperwork. The records are verified. Ms. Kendall is the legal owner. My mother turned on him, eyes sharp with disbelief. You don't understand, she said. We've used this house for 15 years. He nodded. And you've done so without consent. That stops today. Elise's face flushed. Grandma would never choose her over us. I said she already had. Twice in writing. She left you memories. I added. She left me the deed. The words landed with the weight of fact. Caroline's composure cracked. You manipulated her, she hissed. You poisoned her against me. I asked when she'd last visited Ruth outside the holidays. When she'd last called without needing something. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. You think this gives you power? She said finally. It gives me peace, I answered. Something you never offered. Thomas glanced between us, realizing what had been hidden in plain sight. So she knew, he murmured. And I nodded. She knew who cared. Elise crossed her arms, her voice trembling. You can't just throw us out on Christmas Eve. I told her they had 30 minutes to collect their things, that the officer would ensure everyone left safely. My mother's voice broke through the hush. Fine, she said. You want to know why you were never invited? Because every time I looked at you, I saw him, the man who ruined my life. The sentence hung in the cold air, raw and irreversible. I felt the weight of 15 years settle into meaning and said quietly, I'm not him. I'm what you tried to erase. She looked away first. The certainty gone from her posture, I handed her the last document. An eviction notice already dated and signed. You had your seasons here. I told her, this one's mine. Then I stepped back and closed the door. When the last car disappeared down the road, the house fell silent in a way that didn't feel empty, only clean. I gathered the papers from the floor where my mother had dropped them, stacked them back into their folder, and placed it on the table. The clock in the kitchen ticked steadily, marking the first minutes of peace I'd ever owned. Then a soft knock came from the porch, and when I opened the door, Aunt Lydia stood there holding an envelope. She said quietly, Ruth asked me to give this to you when everything was done. I stepped aside, and she came in, her eyes moving across the space that had once belonged to everyone but me. I wasn't sure I'd have the courage, she admitted. She made me promise not to interfere before the time was right. I told her she was here now, and that was enough. She handed me the envelope, its seal faintly cracked, and added, she wrote it the week before she passed. 2. I opened it slowly, the paper thin and fragile, and read the familiar handwriting. Amara, don't waste your strength asking them to see you differently. Just make it impossible for them to forget. My throat tightened as the words blurred slightly. the ink sinking deeper into the page than it should have. Lydia watched quietly and said, "She saw everything. You know, the holidays. The calls that never came. She wanted you to know you weren't imagining it." I folded the letter and placed it beside the deed. "She already told me that. Just in her own way," I said. "She gave me proof instead of comfort." "Oh." Lydia sat down at the edge of the couch. Her voice low. "I should have done more than notice. I asked Caroline every year why you weren't at Christmas. And she always had an excuse. I asked if she believed her." "I did," she said after a moment. "Because it was easier than fighting your mother." I nodded and replied, "That's how she kept it alive, everyone choosing peace over truth." Lydia looked at the photographs still hanging on the wall. The ones I hadn't taken down yet. "It doesn't look peaceful now," she said softly. "It looks honest. Doc." We drank tea in silence until the light shifted across the floor. When she stood to leave, she touched my shoulder. "You've done what Ruth wanted," she said. "She'd be proud of you." I told her I wasn't sure pride was what I felt. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what makes you different from the rest of us." After she left, I sat alone with the letter beside me and the house around me. Both finally mine. The tide moved in and out beyond the porch. The sound steady and unbothered, as if the world had simply corrected itself. A year later, the house felt entirely mine, its walls no longer echoing anyone else's name. That Christmas, I set the table for 4 instead of 23. Aunt Lydia arrived first, carrying a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. Her face lit with the kind of ease that only follows truth. She said, "Ruth's recipe. Found it in her old notebook." And I smiled because it tasted like closure more than celebration. My 2 closest friends from Denver, Hannah and Carmen, came next, both surprised by how peaceful the ocean sounded without the noise of expectation. "You actually did it," Hannah said, looking around the dining room. "You turned a family shrine into a home." I told her it wasn't about turning it into something new, only about stopping it from pretending to be something it wasn't. The last to arrive was Deputy Calvin, invited because he'd once said hard things weren't impossible. "Never thought I'd see this place quiet," he said, setting his coat on the rack. "Quiet's earned," I replied. We ate slowly, the sound of waves slipping through the windows like a heartbeat. Conversation came easily, no hidden questions, no waited pauses. Lydia lifted her glass first and said, "To Ruth," and to the granddaughter who remembered what family should mean. The others echoed softly, their glasses clinking against mine. For a moment, I saw the reflection of candlelight in the wine and thought of that first envelope. The one that had started everything. The handwriting. The seal. The promise, "Stop letting them pretend you don't exist." After dinner, when the house fell still again, I found another envelope tucked behind her photo on the mantel. It read, "For your first Christmas as owner." Inside was a short note. "Living true will always matter more than living loud. You did both." I folded it carefully and placed it beside the deed. Outside, the tide rolled steady against the shore, and the air smelled like salt and cedar. The table I'd set that night wasn't just smaller, it was right-sized. For the first time, everyone seated there had chosen to be. And I finally understood that peace wasn't the absence of noise, it was the sound of belonging. Thank you for staying until the end of my story. I've learned that peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from choosing who gets a seat at your table. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're watching from and what peace looks like in your life.